Recording is underway, and I'm now going to share my screen. All right. Thank you, everybody, for taking time out of your busy day, wherever you are on this wonderful planet Earth. We're clearly living in interesting times. They're going to get a lot more interesting than they are already. So my name is David Edick Jr. I'm past president of the San Diego World Affairs Council, and amongst my various hats over the years, spent 30 years interacting and doing business in Russia, a lot of NGO sister cities work, and I'm an energy specialist. So today, I have been asked by the Continuing Education Center at Rancho Bernardo to speak on Putin versus Europe, the geopolitics of natural gas. So on February 24th, 2022, Russia invaded Ukraine. Despite all the predictions, this really was a shock. It certainly was to me, even with a long buildup ahead of time. You know, the politics of and the art of negotiation, well, this all failed. And delusion has come into play on the part of Vladimir Putin in a very important way. And we were all going to have to deal with the complications of it. And we're going to have to watch out for our unintended, the consequences of our reactions to it. So this war has broken out. We now have a crisis that is very likely to result in at least 5 to 7 million refugees here over the next month, and all that that speaks of. But meanwhile, there's also a massive energy and commodity shock building out of this through sanctions and self-sanctioning behavior. So last year actually was an amazing time in the European natural gas market. Prices had reached extraordinary levels. So you look here at the graphic, and this covers the years from late 2005 all the way through December 21st of last year. And you can see a mountainous spike. There was a lot of arguing within the industry about what was going on and what caused this spike. But it's gotten a whole lot worse now that the war is underway in Ukraine. The circles indicate the price peaks that were stratospheric to begin with. And yesterday, those prices soared 325 here. And I'm not going to get into the definitions per se. The takeaway on my graphics mostly is the shape, the change. I'm not going to ask you to get a master's degree in natural gas today. So yesterday prices peaked at 325 and fell back to around 225. I have no idea what has happened today. Now, so far, there have been 0 gas cuts by Russia, despite what you may have read elsewhere. So what's going on? So primarily what's going on is speculation driven by incredible uncertainty, as well as margin calls within the marketplace in a very illiquid market. So you get crazy pricing behavior. There is self-sanctioning behavior on the spot market and in the natural gas market, the traded, rapidly traded aspects of the market, as companies refuse to do business with Russian products, either for PR reasons or their own perspective on things, or being safe with their own company, just not willing to take a risk in the face of rapidly evolving sanctions situation. And on a small detail so far as the challenge for Russian natural gas out of the Yamal Peninsula and the Arctic to land at ports in the UK or mainland Europe. There are problems with cargo insurance now. The financial sanctions are causing all kinds of turbulence in shipping and the ability to finance the movement of cargoes. And the British unions have also stepped forward and said that they wouldn't serve Russian ships coming to UK ports. So a quick look at the European natural gas market. This is an enormously complex slide, but it represents all the flows. Now, I'm going to come to this at the end of the presentation. On the right is Russia. Russian gas being sourced in Western Siberia near the Arctic, a very long way from Europe, and coming into Europe through a complex of very large pipelines. Currently, Russia sends about 170, 180 billion cubic meters of gas through pipelines to Europe. Norway sends closer to 115 billion cubic meters. Norway is a big, it is the second supplier to Europe. Europe is increasingly its own minor supplier. The primary source for natural gas now in Europe is Russia. Second is Norway. Third is LNG brought in from various places around the world. And fourth, down here at the bottom, is Algeria, kind of the roots for European gas supplies. The vast discoveries of natural gas in Algeria in the 1950s are still supplying Europe. So again, I'm going to come to this later on. While we're here, so this is a couple years old, and now the United States is probably around 20 million metric tons of gas per year in LNG coming into Europe. Russia is about the same in LNG, and that's in addition to the pipeline flows. Qatar is the largest supplier of LNG to Europe and remains the largest supplier of LNG to Europe. So a quick review: Russia is the primary source of natural gas. It's the leading foreign provider to Europe. Norway, which has an associate arrangement with the European Union, it is not an EU member, is also a very large supplier. The North Sea has largely gone dry in terms of gas supply, leaving the UK very much dependent on sources of gas from abroad, particularly LNG, liquefied natural gas. Algeria to the south here is a large supplier into Spain and Italy, so from the south. And here under the Black Sea, Russia supplies gas through Turkey and under the Black Sea into southeastern Europe. Europe is a large scale consumer of gas. Got to move my screen around here a little bit. Second to the United States in the world, Russia being a close third. In terms of producers of natural gas, the United States is the largest. Russia is the second. And remember, Russian gas exports to Europe, excluding Turkey, is around 175, 180 billion cubic meters. It's a large part of Russia's production and historically has been very important to Russia. Here on the right, graphics showing the importance of natural gas in Europe's overall energy requirements. About a quarter of Europe's primary energy comes from natural gas. And it's used, the brown here being industrial uses, manufacturing, metals, cement, fertilizer, things of that nature. And then there are buildings and transportation, much of this being space heating, and at home, in commercial settings. Space heating is a very large scale user of natural gas in Europe. And increasingly, natural gas is important in the generation of electricity, and as actually a crucial part of backing up the intermittency of wind and solar energy generation in Europe. There are real implications of this going forward. Here, the takeaway on the far left is it shows the domestic production in Europe, which is on a long-term decline. Originally based on a gigantic discovery in the Netherlands in 1959. The reserves across Europe are in steady decline. Supplies coming into Europe are primarily by pipeline. Over the last 10 years, Europe has sought to diversify its sources of gas. This is a natural thing. You don't want to put all your eggs in one basket, even if you love the holder of that basket. You have to think in terms of what could go wrong. And this last year, some things have definitely gone wrong. And now with the war in Ukraine, things are very much going wrong. So the idea that Europe has done nothing is very much a mistake. They definitely have been doing something. This gives you an idea, looking back through history, going back to 1970, using the measure on the left. This is in billion cubic meters. For reference, say, California uses about 60 billion cubic meters a year, a little over maybe. The blue represents domestic production across Europe. The vast majority of this actually taking place in a single field in the Netherlands, the Groningen field, supplemented by fields nearby in the Netherlands, and to some modest degree on land elsewhere in Europe and in the North Sea. As it became clear, the Groningen and domestic European supplies were not going to be adequate to meet demand as Europe switched from coal to more efficient and flexible energy supplies via natural gas. Demand abroad emerged and was firstly met through supplies from the Soviet Union, and then increasingly out of the North Sea and from Norway. The red line, matching the scale on the right, shows that Europe's dependence on gas from abroad has steadily, this has just been a very steady story for 50 years, going from when nearly all gas was supplied from inside Europe to now about 10%. I want to focus here on the two lower lines. We were just looking at domestic production in Europe. That's represented by this EU 28. And you can see the importance of adding Norway. It's very big. Now, Norway's amazing story in the world of natural gas and oil is about to come to a slow and it's coming to an end. Geology is what it is. We're now at the peak output in Norway for natural gas. That peak will last for a couple of years, and then Norway will go into a sustained, steady decline. This very light shaded color, this is what hope looks like. This is guessing, but I will tell you that the exploration off Norway, certainly in the traditional areas, has been in rapid decline, very little to be found. And in the more exotic regions of in the Arctic, that has been a big disappointment for Norway. So I actually think that this is very optimistic and very much over optimistic in terms of Norway's future. And when one talks in terms about Nord Stream 2 and thinking in terms of planning for energy delivery and consumption over decades, this decline of Norway, this is part of why Nord Stream 2 is built. Yeah, a big part of it was to get around Ukraine, no question. But another part of it was to assure to be able to fill in as Norway's production declined. This graphic, a little bit fuzzy. This gives you an idea where the Russians fit in on things over a number of years. The light blue being representing domestic output inside the European Union, the red being Russian supply, the orange being Norway, the green being LNG, and you can see a steady increase, particularly in the last 3-4 years, of LNG's importance in Europe. The reddish pink being Algeria, and yeah, there's actually a pipeline to Libya, and all the fun that entails, all the complexity. And on the far, the right-hand side, you can see the emergence of gas coming from Azerbaijan through the Trans-Anatolia pipeline. So there's been tremendous turbulence this last year, and there's now a war on. I do want to point out that the Nord Stream 1 pipeline, which already exists and flows 55 billion cubic meters basically at full capacity, this is a very steady flow. This is really the backbone flow for gas flowing from Russia into Europe now, Nord Stream 1. The yellow representing flows of several pipes coming through Ukraine, quite volatile this last year. The green, I will explain what's going on here with the volatility. And this has been a very, very difficult year for the industry, and especially for kind of a novice look in to see what's going on. And with geopolitics being on everyone's mind, a lot of conclusions have been jumped, and now we've got a war. So just real quick, the origins of Europe's gas trade with Russia go back to the Soviet era, coming through Austria. Firstly, Austria in 1955, the victors of World War II, the Soviet Union, the United States, France, and UK, all had zones in Austria as well as in Berlin and Germany. And in 1955, the Austrians were released from this oversight. The Soviets withdrew, Western allies withdrew, and the Austrians, on the basis of the Austrians declaring a strict neutrality. But through this neutral doorway, gas trade developed in the mid to late 60s. And that gas trade was based on managed markets, long-term contracts, take or pay. Some of this stuff is going to be familiar to people here on this call from here in the United States, from the old days of how gas was done. This is really what we're all familiar with here in the United States, and it's changed here too. The unbundling and the liberalization, the marketization, the financialization of gas and electricity. It's happened in Europe, it's happened here, sometimes with complications, as we know in California and in Texas, and this year in Europe. The trade between East and West was basically steel pipes from the West, compressors and finance exchanged for gas on the basis of long-term contracts, and the prices were linked to the price of fuel products, particularly oil. I'm going to jump past this. The arrangements between the Soviet Union and Western Europe were complicated by, let's say, a complex relationship in Eastern Europe. No one should get the idea that the East European countries, Warsaw Pact or Comecon countries, were without agency. They were complications for the Soviets in the process of building this gas bridge, if you will, to Europe. And nowadays in Europe, the market is demand driven. It's buyer driven. It's not what Gazprom or the Russians say or what they want. It's a market, and it's the guy, it's the person with the money that, or the demand. We want to buy it, and we're going to pay for it, and you deliver it, and we'll work out the price. Well, and prices are now, since the fixed price long-term contracts are banned, prices are indexed on what are virtual hubs. It's trading by computer. Spot market, the futures market have a central role. And the EU won a pitched legal battle with Gazprom in the period of 2011 to 2018, and ultimately the liberalization of the market is truly ascendant in Europe, very much on an Anglo-Saxon model. Now, the turbulence this last year in the questions about, are the Russians manipulating the gas flows into Europe? This is very much based on the interaction within contracts, within the market itself, where the interaction between spot market prices and a month forward. I understand that this is complex, or maybe it's new to most people. But the bottom line is that buyers' incentives vary depending on which price is higher. Kind of makes sense, right? So there are times when there were considerable disincentives to buying on the spot market, and there were real incentives to not buying at all, which led to some very substantial declines in the amount of gas flowing from Russia to Europe. All the contracts were being met. Gazprom did step away from the spot market, but everyone else who was in the gas market, and it's a myriad of companies, they were able to buy and sell as well. So while it removed an important player, there were a lot of other players in the market. And what happened in Europe in terms of pricing ultimately was driven by developments in the liquefied natural gas market globally. A big jump in demand in Brazil, unexpected because of a drought there, and also the fact that China and Japan really got the wallet out and they bid, and Europe had to chase them higher. And remember, Europe had diversified toward LNG. However, their focus on the spot market left them vulnerable to the dark side of immediate pricing. So now with the war in Ukraine, we're living at the hinge of history right now. One era has closed and a new era is dawning. What was will be no more. And I think that this is hardly understood really in the Kremlin, and it's barely understood here. The emotions are running very high in the West, and the delusion was pretty thick in the Kremlin, and you get interaction between those two. And life gets really interesting. But there's no question that as a result of the war in Ukraine, there's no question that Europe is embarked on a committed path of de-russification. Now, is this possible? And is it feasible? Well, uh, whether we like it or not, it's going to happen. Uh, and the speed at which it happens is going to have enormous implications on price and product availability around the world. This graphic here, this is looking at a year's supply. This is a projection assuming the removal of Russian natural gas from the European market. This yellow shows the deficit that would result from that. That deficit occurring primarily in the winter months, and that deficit being really big. Aspirations and intentions aside, you go to turn the hot water on, you go to turn the heat on, you go flip the switch to get electricity. Firstly, you want them to be there regardless of price being a secondary factor on a really, really cold morning. Try taking a cold shower in January. This graphic showing the spiky behavior in terms of demand. This is across from 2014 through last year, and you can see the impact of winter, the tremendous pull of demand for natural gas every winter. And these spikes are put tremendous pressure on the infrastructure, and it's the storage of natural gas. And Europe has enough storage for about between 20 and 25% of its annual demand. And it's used as a cushion to take care of these surges that would otherwise overwhelm the normal infrastructure flows, the ability to bring gas in from supplies elsewhere. Now, there are those that are going to talk about the renewables and we'll decarbonize and de-russify. And so we're going to build more wind, we're going to build more renewables, and we'll satisfy two important goals for Europe. This graphic is a picture of power generation this last year in Sweden. It's a small market, but it's very indicative, very illustrative of the challenge of renewables. This green showing this is wind generation. It's a really volatile behavior. The underlying red showing the nuclear generation. Traditional nuclear not being particularly flexible, but terrific as a baseline. Wind being insanely flexible and not particularly reliable at the baseline. The role of natural gas across the European Union is to essentially moderate between these big baseline producing assets and the volatility and the intermittency that's with wind. Solar as well. Solar tends to be pretty weak when the sun angle's low in the winter in the northern hemisphere. The details matter in terms of renewables generation. The fact of the matter is that as much as Europe may want to expand its renewables option, in order to do so, it's making a deep commitment to natural gas. Batteries are a fun thing to talk about, but the reality is batteries are no more than able to store short capacity, few hours, and you can have enormous banks of batteries that might get you a few more hours, but it's not an option in terms of days, which is the reality in wind generation. You can see the gaps here. These are not a few hours. These are large gaps. And if you're going to base your grid on that, You need a lot of storage, and the idea of batteries is mostly talk at this point, and it's got a long road to go for it to be real. So looking at Russia's gas supply to Europe, and again, we're at the end, we're changing to a new era. We're at the hinge of history. Europe is deciding, and believe me, Washington is encouraging. The United States, Washington D.C. has always seen Russian gas supply to Europe as a strategic threat of some kind. Maybe, anyways. So this is this is the scale of what needs to be replaced. This shows the behavior over a long period of time, which was a highly responsible commercial relationship between East and West. This bridge having been built over decades and decades, built on trust. Yeah, trust but verify. But over decades, that trust but verify becomes a real trust. And now that's being thrown out the window, on the basis of the war in Ukraine and the reaction to it. Multiple pipelines coming in from Russia. Nord Stream 2, just really quick. When Putin recognized the two rebel republics in eastern Ukraine, the Luhansk People's Republic and Donetsk People's Republic, largely mafia-run, weird zones, created in the post-Maidan war in East Ukraine in 2014. When Putin recognized those two republics as a prelude to the invasion of Ukraine, Germany halted the certification process. Now, that certification process had slowed down a lot over the last year as tensions over Ukraine had been building. But this particular halt it's the real deal. I don't see this coming on for a very long time, if ever, and I'm not alone in that. So this is a map here showing that this pipeline was meant to, both of the Nord Stream 1 and Nord Stream 2 are meant to skirt around the Baltic states and Poland through essentially neutral or international waters in the Baltic Sea, and is meant to be a direct bridge between Russia and Germany. These 5 companies helped finance the construction of Nord Stream 2. OMV from Austria, they have written off their investment. This is all in the last 10 days. Shell has written off their investment. Yesterday, Uniper wrote off their investment. These are billion-dollar write-offs. Wintershall, DEA out of Germany. Uniper is Germany, but owned by the Finland. These 4 companies have written off their investment, and this is roughly $4 billion in write-offs. They are walking away. Engie of France has yet to walk away. They're still considering their options. The plan was, this is showing the flows from Russia into Europe. The blue representing well, it's to the EU, Turkey via Ukraine. Okay, this is the flows through Ukraine. The green is the emergence of Nord Stream 1. And you can see now that Nord Stream 1 is really the backbone of flows into Europe. The yellow, this is Turk Stream. It's what's called Turk Stream. This goes under the Black Sea to Turkey and then curls up into southeastern Europe toward the hub at Baumgarten in Austria. The red, it was the projected arrival of Nord Stream 2. It's not going to happen. So any flows that were projected to be coming through the Nord Stream 2 are going to come through. They're going to come through Ukraine. We can talk about the Yamal pipeline that goes through Poland. That's a more tricky. It's a complicated relationship between Russia and Poland and Germany. It's a detail that has been eclipsed by the catastrophe that we are now witnessing. So Europe's diversification versus LNG, gas can be cooled. If you cool it to minus 162 Celsius, it goes from a gas to a liquid, and that liquid occupies 1/600th of the space, and it allows for the shipment via special ships from one part of the world to another. It costs quite a bit of money, but it's economic in the sense that it's competitive. Here on the right, I did some quick calculations. So 175 billion cubic meters of gas going from Russia to Europe. Cut out the flows that are purchased by Turkey. That leaves you with roughly 150 billion cubic meters. You use the multiple to convert pressurized gas to LNG, and you get 110 million metric tons. We'll just hold that number in mind, 110 million metric tons. Looking at this second graphic here, these are the 5 largest exporters of natural gas, of liquefied natural gas in the world. The United States is now actually pulled into the lead at a little over 80 million tons. And there's incremental capacity coming on again as this year goes on, but the amount of gas flowing through pipelines from Russia to Europe exceeds the total capacity of the United States LNG industry. This is Qatar, Australia. Let's see, Russia and Malaysia. It's taken 10 years basically to build this US LNG industry. It's primarily fracked gas. It will take many years. I don't care how much money you throw at this, it will take many years to really change this number. Qatar is in the process of expanding its output to 110, and that's going to take them 5-6 years. A gigantic project. It has taken years into planning as well. So this is a quick look at US LNG flows last year to different parts of the world. Actually, US LNG's biggest market is in Asia. You can see the spike at the end of the year, the shift in flows to Europe, as Europe was willing to pay any price to bring gas to its market. And ultimately, the Asians sold their gas to the Europeans once their storages were full and the winter was a little milder than it feared. Gas flowed to Europe. Just a little more of a look here. Again, this is US LNG exports going abroad. The red being to East Asia and the Pacific. The lighter red, South Asia. This is India, basically. Then Europe. And you can see Latin America. And again, the role of Brazil this year was actually quite large, and it all came from the US. This shows the contract basis of flows of LNG out of the United States. The darker blue being contract, and the lighter blue being spot market. And this is controlled not by US companies, but buyers. Almost entirely. The US LNG business is basically a toll operation. They buy gas, they liquefy it and sell it, and buyers take it off their hands. US companies are actually not so much involved in marketing their product abroad. It's the buyers, the foreign buyers that do that. That either take delivery or trade it, and you can see the tradability um, is substantial. So that also means that there's this competition over who's going to get it, and that competition is going to be about price. You'll hear about freedom gas, but it's the freedom with the wallet. That's really what counts. This is a look at the LNG market in Europe. You can see the big surge in the importance of LNG the last few years. The different countries, they're kind of a noisy graphic. The main thing being the big jump in overall participation in the LNG market, and that it's volatile, and that gaps, you can see the gap from the COVID, but this gap here driven substantially by breakdowns in the industry and by mechanical breakdowns or maintenance issues, and also the fact that Asia came to buy and Europe was not prepared to pay the price and got caught short. Looking ahead on a global basis, remember that 110 million metric tons. Now, it's obvious that Europe isn't going to come into the world for all of that, but it just gives you an idea of scale. And let's say Europe comes out and is going to want 20 million tons this year and another additional incremental 20 the next. So that 110, so here we are at 2022, say roughly 450 million tons worldwide. The arrival of Europe to the market for an extra 110 million tons. Wow. Okay. Good luck with that. That's going to have some price implications, and it's just tremendous price implications. And the reality is that the LNG isn't there in a practical sense. A little bit coming out of the LNG that comes out of Russia from the Yamal. It's a substantial amount. It's almost equal to what the U.S. sells into the European market today. Part of de-russification is going to be to close this off. That's the idea, and the kind of a halfway point on that is going to be transshipping from very special Arctic class LNG carriers that carry it through the ice of the north to ice-free waters off of Norway. This is a fjord in the north of Norway where you have here 2 Russian LNG tankers are transferring their cargoes to tankers that do not have the ice classification, and these ships will take it to the ports in Europe. So again, coming back to this guy here, the scale of what is being discussed in terms of de-russification. Algeria has been a long time supplier, a large, a significant supplier to Europe. There is extra pipeline capacity available to send gas from Algeria to Spain and to Italy. About 40% of Italy's gas imports. Okay, and Italy's a big gas market. That's 70. That's bigger than California. Okay. Problem in Algeria is investment. They just announced several $100 billion investment program in Algeria this last fall just to maintain output. To grow it is going to require a much larger set of investments, and will require many years. Think in terms of 3 years to start, where you're really going to get a noticeable incremental increase in supply coming out of Algeria. Libya is just a really politically challenging place now. Um, so flows from Africa are going to, in some years from now, going to have an effect, a positive effect for Spain and for Italy. LNG flows. So to replace, to de-russify is an enormous challenge, not just for Europe, but its implications for the rest of the world. So this is I could go on, but we got an hour here and I've used up most of it. So I'm going to come here to a bit of a conclusion. A few days ago, the International Energy Agency, which is an advisory group to the developed countries, North America and Europe. This agency was set up after the Arab oil embargo, 73, 74 period, and is designed to guide policymakers on energy topics. A lot of air, a lot of oxygen was used up last year in terms of IEA advice and guidance on decarbonization. While it's on my mind here, in my view, one of the large casualties of this war in Ukraine is decarbonization. I actually think this is going to lead to essentially a lost decade on this, despite hopes, and a lot of money is going to get thrown at building renewables. But renewables comes tied to natural gas. Or there's no easy way around this, and the idea that you can do it on 100% renewables, I mean, it's just, there's basic math here, and it just doesn't add up. It's easy to talk about things, it's easy to make claims, but if you are responsible, if you are ultimately responsible, you kind of have to, you get to deal with the facts that are in front of you. But the IEA has produced a 10-point plan to help the European Union reduce its reliance on natural gas. The first being no new supply contracts with Russia. The existing set of contracts will slowly run off as the years go by. Between 10 and 20 billion cubic meters a year will run off contract in this year. Slowly over the next 5 to 10 years, those contracts will expire. If the de-russification is really, really aggressive, maybe maybe Europe wants to break those contracts. Maybe the politics are there for that. But there are real implications for this. There will be a tomorrow, and to walk away from contracts of this scale has implications for those that may be building to satisfy your needs tomorrow. And if they have some question as to your reliability as a client, as a customer, you will pay a higher price to get what it is that you need. So the idea of no new contracts with Russia is a reasonable one. That's an easy, just no new contracts, you let it run off. But the deal is that various investments are going to be pursued, and more than money, they will take time. And the faster you want to go, the higher the cost will be. So this starting now, and then especially later in 2022, as summer begins to really get moving and the Asians look ahead to their winter as well, Europe is going to use its buying power to attract LNG. And I have been talking with people in the developing world, around the world, and really suggesting that they pay attention to what's going on here, because they are bystanders to this, yet they are going to experience the consequences of it. the ability of South Asia, for example, and developing countries to pay that price to compete with Europe or Japan or China to buy that LNG is going to be a real challenge. Another thing that's going to come out of this is a substantial revival in coal across Europe. This is one way to, there is some more variability to a coal-fired fleet than there is with nuclear. It can act as a backup to renewables, but renewables and coal, what a mix, and imagine the politics of that. But the deal is, it's going to be a substantial revival in coal, which contains its own complication, because Russia actually is the single largest supplier of coal to Europe. Close to half of Germany's supply is from Russia, and not just Germany. The coal-centric Poland, for example, the overwhelming majority of their coal imports, which are now a very substantial part of their market, Poland is overwhelmingly dependent on Russian coal. Complicated world. In terms of nuclear, this will be a pause that refreshes. There's no doubt about it. And it's already been floated in Germany that the remaining nuclear plants, there were 3 that were closed at the turn of this year, 3 more still to be closed. That was the plan. They're going to remain open, and it wouldn't surprise me to see those plants that were closed somehow find their way back online. Energy efficiency is probably the lowest hanging fruit out there. Investments can be made within a year that have a significant impact. There's going to be a tremendous campaign going into next winter, and maybe even now. I mean, this stuff is all moving on a day by, almost an hour by hour basis. Turning thermostats down. This is an important way in which to cut the space heating demand, and so that we're going to hear a lot about that. Demand destruction, and this is one of the dangerous points here. Already this past year, demand destruction, well, that's a that's a fancy name, meaning you stop doing something. You stop running the heat, or you turn off a fertilizer factory, or paper or aluminum manufacturing. The energy intensive aspects of European manufacturing and economic activity, that energy intensive stuff is going to get very, very expensive. And much of that activity is going to be pushed offshore. In some sense, the United States will benefit, but one of the side effects of the move of fertilizer manufacture out of Europe to North America and elsewhere was within a couple of weeks the doubling of fertilizer prices in the United States, which has had a huge impact on farming here in the U.S. This will be a very challenging year for planting in the United States as farmers try to work out the intersection between costs and revenues. Of course, prices for grains are just going to the moon, but it's a very turbulent time, and your commitment as a farmer is for a season. Once you put it in, you're in. And then finally, the shock to low-income countries and to low-income populations. This energy shock that we are creating in response to the invasion of Ukraine. This is us. It's not the Russians. This is us, legitimate, justified, whatever. We are generating an enormous energy shock, and in other commodities as well, but we're here to talk about gas. This huge energy shock is going to just be devastating to low-income countries. And think firstly in terms of India. Their ability to stay in this game of where coal prices on the Pacific doubled in a week after having been at record levels the last 6 months of the year. This is a huge thing to manage in a country that has vast populations that are kind of barely hanging on. Anyways, they don't have a lot of flexibility. The political implications of that are really quite extraordinary. So while we are while we are dealing with a catastrophic invasion on the basis of really delusions in the Kremlin, how we respond to that through sanctions, through self-sanctioning, through the consequences of that, we really have to think this through. I'm just saying, you know, I'm not saying that one particular approach is better than the other necessarily. I'm not saying that somebody's right or somebody's wrong. I'm just saying that the policies, the actions that we are taking now will have consequences. And we may, and quite frankly, we will be surprised at what those implications are in terms of the situation with the economy worldwide. And I'm not talking about, discretionary stuff. This is going to be a really powerful wave, a tsunami that is just beginning. It's still building. This tsunami that washes through the global economy, and we will experience it here. I mean, starting to see it with gasoline prices. But for Europe and their efforts to de-russify, one will interfere with decarbonization. But as challenging as decarbonization was, or is, de-russification will be filled with great challenges as well. Thank you.
David, thank you very much. Usual excellent presentation. We're trying the Q&A. If you go to chat and enter, of course, your name, and that will be the easiest for us to go in sequence. If we go through the process of raising your hand, that's really going to be up to David to decide which direction he's going to be going. If you do the chat, I think we'll be in a much better situation.